Welcome to Side Alpha Leadership, a podcast where leaders can share their experiences and discuss what leadership means to them. I'm your host, David Polikoff. Hello, welcome to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. I'm your host, David Polikoff. This is Season 5, Episode 12, which means this will be airing in December 1st. I'm fortunate enough to have on the line with me Chief Siddiq. I ran across him like we run across many people in the fire service via social media. He has a really decent footprint on Instagram with his leadership platform. So he'll just go out and just kind of walk the grounds of the fire department and just kind of talk about leadership stuff that he's picked up along the way. Really good stuff, a lot of inspirational stuff, a lot of stuff that makes you think. So without me, like I always do, I ramble on. Chief Siddiq, welcome to the show. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. As my name is Abdurrahim Siddiq, but most people, of course, more affectionately known as Siddiq or Chief Siddiq. And I've been in the fire service 38 years. I am retired from the United States Air Force. I was a firefighter in the Air Force, so I did 20 years in the Air Force. And then once I retired from the military portion, I moved over into contracting. So I did contracting with the Department of Defense in several places around the world, including South America, East Africa, and of course Southeast Asia. I'm sorry, and and I'm born and raised in Washington D.C. And once I left Washington D.C., I lived most of my time down south, was where I was stationed mostly. So, and I'm currently at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So. And that's the fire service that I'm in, the fire department that I'm in now.
So a couple things I want to unpack there. You said you're from the Washington, D.C. area. That's where I was born and raised. And I live outside of the Washington, D.C. Mostly I'm outside of the Baltimore area now. So where were you born? Where were you raised in Washington?
I was born and raised in Northwest Washington, D.C.
Okay.
If you're familiar with Washington, D.C., if you know Georgia Avenue and New Hampshire Avenue, my teenage years was mostly on Quincy Street Northwest, which is one block up from that intersection of Georgia and New Hampshire and Northwest. But I went to Ballou High School.
Okay, so that's the heart of Engine Company 24 down in D.C. And I was born and raised, born in Prince George's County, lived in Landover for a year, then Greenbelt and PG County, and then my family moved to Montgomery County. Spent the rest of my time in Spencerville, which is just outside of Prince George's County. Now, when I got hired in the fire service, I was hired through the corporation of the Silver Spring Fire Department, which was on Georgia Avenue in the 8100 block of Georgia Avenue, so literally like 5 blocks from the D.C. line, the Shepherd's Park area, if you're familiar with that area.
Yes, I do know where that is.
That's where I did most of my time as a firefighter before I got promoted. We call that the 1st Battalion of Montgomery County, and that's where I spent a majority of my career. I started there, volunteered there, hired, worked there, and retired in the 1st Battalion. So very, very familiar with that area of of Northwest, which is literally right on the line between Northwest and Northeast DC.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's like a small world, you know, it's pretty cool. Now, the other connection I have, you're in Albuquerque now, and Bobby Halton, who was the editor of Fire Engineering Magazine, just passed away. Mm-hmm. I met Bobby Halton. He was an assistant chief, I want to say, with the Albuquerque, New Mexico Fire Department. I met him when he was selling nozzles for a company called First Strike. Yeah. So got a little bit of a connection with the Albuquerque area as well. And it's a funny thing. We just had the chief of Santa Fe, New Mexico, Santa Fe County, New Mexico.
Okay.
The chief came up to where I work now in Frederick County because they are getting ready to start a combination system of career and volunteer. And she actually worked. She was Bobby Halton's rookie when she worked for the Albuquerque Fire Department. So, like I said, the fire department is it's just a small world. It's you find out this person, and you might not know that person, but that person knows that person who knows you, type of deal. So,
Yeah, yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit about the military stuff, like we talked offline. I like talking to people that have come from a military background.
Hmm.
Like I had said, I was not in the military. My dad was in Vietnam. My aspirations was to always be a firefighter, so I got hired right out of high school. So at the age of 18, I started in the fire service. But one of the things that I've learned over the last few years of talking with new recruits that are coming in that came from the military, where they either were a non-commissioned officer or started off as a private, and they move up the ranks up to sergeant. They had always talked about how they had gone through leadership classes, schools, to learn how to be a corporal, to learn how to be a sergeant, to learn how to lead people, and to learn how to get people to follow you. And a lot of those courses were steeped in being humble, to be true to yourself, and take care of your men. So, talk us a little bit about what you learned in the military, what you picked up, and how that translated over to where you are now.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. The so as in the Air Force, you have three tiers. Basically, you have the beginning tier, which is airman. Then the middle tier is the sergeant or the NCO, and then the upper tier is the senior NCO. And each one of those levels has leadership schools for each of those levels. So I did the Airman Leadership School and the NCO Leadership School, and I retired even though I was a senior NCO, I retired before I actually took the senior NCO Leadership School. So the Airman Leadership School, it introduces the young military members, the young Air Force members, into what leadership is and what to expect from leadership and how to relate to your leaders and how and what your position and duties are in regard to accomplishing our mission. And that's the number one thing for all the schools that we do is accomplishing and achieving the goals of whatever mission that we are moving towards. So the first leadership school is mainly about introducing the young people into what leadership is and how to relate to leadership. And then the NCO, the Sergeant Leadership School, the NCO Leadership School, that is normally the working supervisor, and they're the middle tier between the airmen and not actual leaders, but you know what I'm saying, the senior NCOs, which I guess in the fire service you would say those are the assistant chiefs. So the senior NCOs and above. But that middle tier, it teaches you how to transition from being an airman to a working supervisor and how that dynamic and the relationship should work, because these are a lot of them are the people that you came in with, that you're friends with, and so now you have to learn how to negotiate that delicate relationship now that you've moved from um, the lower tier to the middle tier of supervisory, and so your concepts get a little bit more in depth. And then, of course, in the senior NCO, even though I didn't go to that one, that's more on a strategic level. It teaches you how to be strategic in the processes, how to motivate your middle tier in order to bring about a certain climate of motivation and inspiration for the people within your career field. So I hope I've explained it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what are some of the things that you picked up? And one of the few things that we talked about offline, and I've touched on this before, is leadership in the military, learning it versus leadership in the fire service. It's taught the same in the military, be it the Air Force. or the Marines, the Army, the Navy. They have their leadership schools, they have their NCO schools, and what you're learning in the United States is the same thing as if you're stationed in Japan or you're stationed, in the Middle East or whatever. Those classes are the same, so it's standardized, like you had said offline. How can we as a fire service kind of approach that concept? I know, that it's difficult to bring the concepts of leadership um, to be close to the same for the fire service. The fire service is so dynamic. You got East Coast versus West Coast type of firefighting, and the North versus the South type of firefighting. But at the end of the day, the goals, the mission should be the same. So, what would be your view if you could write a leadership class, or to get the word out of how we could standardize leadership so lieutenants are being trained to be lieutenants, captains are being trained to be captains? Because at the end of the day, fire is fire. You're pulling hose lines into structures regardless of the type of structure, and the end goal is the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense, but I don't know if that's possible with the fire service. And the reason why I say that is because the when you're talking about the U.S. military or the Department of Defense, talking about Air Force specifically, all of our curriculums come out of one particular place. So, and that's out of Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, in Maxwell, Alabama. So and we have, I don't know how many. So yeah, so all the leadership curriculums, or every curriculum for the United States Air Force, comes out of the Air Educational Training Center, which is at Maxwell Air Force Base. So even though we may have maybe 5 or 6 different in different locations, leadership schools that everyone goes to, they all teaching the same curriculum. And the reason why I preface that is because I'm not sure if it's possible for the fire service to have a standardized curriculum for the entire nation. Um, can you hear me? Okay. So um, the only way I can see that is if all the fire chiefs across the nation got together and said, "This is the curriculum we want to teach," and then we push it down from there. So I can't see that happening because all of us go, as in the fire service, we go to different universities, we go all these different other places to get our education and everything. So I can't see that happening. One way is if you know how we have the Fry, for example, or the different leadership conferences or the different fire conferences around the United States at different times of the year. Maybe if someone championed a particular curriculum and do workshops, and then from those workshops, those that attend them go back to the fire departments and then teach them that way. That's one option, but I think that's a daunting task, man. I'm not sure if that's possible.
Yeah, I agree with you. The one thing that we did do um, for the fire service, which is the same from coast to coast, is our incident command system.
Yes.
Once after 9/11, in 2005, when President Bush put that
Yeah.
proclamation together that we'll have the National Incident Management
Right.
System, we're
Yeah.
using that. So to me, that happened.
Yes.
Now it took a little bit of people to get on board, and people do things slightly different command wise, but at the end of the day, like I'm part of a Type 3 incident management team where we go up and down. We'll go anywhere in the country. We can walk into a command post that has already been up and running for a couple of weeks or even a month, shadow them for 24 hours and take
Right.
over. I'm not saying that the fire service, tactically wise, would do that. Like you said, that's a daunting task. Um, but we did do it for
Yes.
NIMS. And I'm not saying the federal government has to get involved in
Right.
firefighting and say, what we have to do. Now, the other thing that we did is the 2 in and 2 out. which is an OSHA
Sure.
standard. Not all places like Washington D.C. They don't follow the OSHA standard because they're not obviously they're not a state. They don't follow the two in
Right.
two out.
Okay.
But when it comes to truck work, I think we all approach ventilation the
Sure.
same way. When it comes to pulling attack lines and going into buildings and applying water, I think we do it the
Sure.
same way. We have ventilate or vent isolate, vent enter and search, vent enter isolate and search. I think that's done pretty much the same way
Sure.
coast to coast. So there's things that people are doing firefighting
Yes.
wise that we're
Yes.
doing um, from coast to coast and north and
Right.
south. So for tactics wise, we're doing that stuff. I'm looking at my library right now. I've got John Norman's book. I think probably everybody has read that at one point or another for part of their promotional exam. Same thing with Brannigan's building construction book.
Right.
Everybody has looked through that for their promotional exam. But when it comes to leadership and how we lead, how we are line officers on the apparatus with our ways of, you know, we know the firefighting part is the easy
Yes.
part. It's the leading
Right.
people or being a leader and having people want to follow you because you're a good leader. And obviously, that takes
Sure.
time to build that credibility. But that's where I think we're lacking. We're not teaching people to be leaders. So, if you're savvy, you will go to some of these conferences around the country. Actually, conferences are everywhere now. You can hit a couple in your own state without having to shell out,
Right.
$1,000. You can get a couple $100. We got one coming up in Frederick in March. That's a couple $100 for hands-on training and
Right.
lectures. You can hit those things and better yourself. But when it comes to recruit school and then, your officer candidate school, I think everybody's on a different
Right.
page, but they want to achieve the same goal. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
100%. I'm following you completely. I do understand exactly what you're saying, and that's the advantage or the difference where, because we're federal firefighters, right? So, and the Department of Defense gives a framework, and you have to work within this framework, right? So, in order for that to happen in the fires in the National Fire Service outside of the federal, of course, is there has to be a governing body that establishes a framework, just like they did with the ICS and the NIMS. They established a framework and say you have to follow this, and so that's the only way that that could happen. You said, and you mentioned that, yeah, we don't want the federal government involved in our day-to-day activities. In the sense, they already are, but
Right.
stuff like that, it would have to be established by a body that we all recognize is our governing body. And that's the difference that we have within the federal fire service and outside of the federal fire service. We have that governing body that tells us you will do it in this fashion.
Right. And I think, like you had alluded to, I think it's a bridge too far to get everybody on the same page when it comes to how we train our officers to be leaders. We can train anybody to ride a
Sure,
front seat, blow the siren, and pull an attack line and go do
sure.
tactics. But the strategy stuff, I think I think everybody has their own way of doing things, and they don't want to, relinquish that. Here in the Mid Atlantic area, when we run incident command, we run it inside of our vehicles, with the doors closed, the
Mm,
windows up, and we're concentrating on the incident, the radios, or tactical
yeah.
worksheets. And then as you go towards the northeast, they're running command from the
Right.
outside of the vehicles in a stationary place, but they're not in the vehicle. They're remote from the
Okay.
vehicle, and so it's two different things, and it's the same goal, but two different ways of running
Sure.
command. So I think at the end of the day, you're probably going to run into some ego issues where it's like, well, I'm not running my command that way. I like doing it
Sure.
this way, and you know, it's no secret that there is ego issues in the fire service. We all have the ego
Yes.
issues. So without beating that dead horse, and it always leads to that when I just want to get other people's perspective on how we can teach our people. Can we take a page out of the military? And again, I think when it comes to leadership wise, I mean, I think that like the National Fire Academy, they could have leadership classes that people could go to, and they do. They have incident command classes and
Right.
things like that that people could go to, but you're not going to be able to catch the entire American fire service
Yeah.
that way. So
So,
it's more of just trying to, trial and
right.
error, and you hear other people doing stuff. You take classes, you see things. If you're in a position to be able to make change or to introduce change, and can back it up and get people on board, you may be able to make small moves. But wholesale changes in the fire service, we know, are very
Yeah, I
difficult.
agree. 100%.
So changing it up a little bit, one of the talks that you did on your Instagram feed, you talked about making the change in the organization because sometimes it has to
Yeah.
happen, and not being being brave enough to see that the change has to happen, and then putting yourself out there to make it happen. So let's talk a little bit about that, and what would you offer new officers that are coming in that are either lieutenants or captains, or even new senior staff officers, assistant chiefs, and deputy chiefs that see a need for change, and then how to go about
Yeah.
doing that.
So yeah, change is difficult for most people, and we understand that, and there's probably many examples of when people come into an organization and then they uproot everything, and then everybody's just, who the heck is this person to come in and change all everything that we do, and so there's an immediate um, animosity towards that person that wants to change something that they feel that has been working fine. So change needs to come from both, from the leader and from the subordinates. And the subordinates have to be able to recognize that change is necessary. And one of the things that we have to teach from the beginning, for especially within the fire service, is that things change over time, and that change is inevitable, and we always have to be ready to accept it when it comes. And unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of places have received that type of uh, training and conditioning to accept change when it comes. Now, for a new person to come into an organization, or a new lieutenant or a new chief officer comes in, you really, even though you may have a lot of good ideas, you don't want to come in and start instituting change right away. Look at the processes and how the organization moves. Look at the personalities. Look at the different people that are around you, your peers, your leaders, as well as your subordinates and your team, and identify first those individuals that are more conducive to change than the others. First, identify those. Those are going to be your the people that are going to help you champion any change. The second thing is, when you're identifying and looking at processes, and you're looking at different ways of, and you see that things could be improved, you want to involve the people as much as possible. You got to be able to identify what that change is and what your expected outcome is, and then you have to be able to sell it to the people that you're leading. And you must specifically ensure that you have at least one naysayer, because there's going to be one within that process, because the naysayer, that person will help you identify the issues that, so you'll say, we need to do this and this and this, and so you ask the naysayer, what would you do in this situation? How do you think that this would go wrong if we do this? Because they'll tell you right away. So you have to be able to incorporate everyone within the change process. Don't make huge changes all at once. Try to do a little bit at a time, incrementally. identify certain goals and put small steps of achieving different objectives throughout that change process. But the key is not doing abrupt changes. The key is to identify those that are conducive or will accept change a lot easier than others, and then get input from the others, even though you're guiding their ideas towards a certain outcome. I hope I've answered that.
Yeah, and that's one of the more difficult things to try to institute is, if you see that there is a need
Sure.
for change, and like you mentioned right in the beginning, if you're a new officer or you have that position as a senior staff, as assistant or deputy chief, or even as the fire chief, and you come in and you just take a broom and you're just going to make these sweeping major changes, fundamentally change the way that they do business, you know, even if it's a great idea, you're going to have people that are going to
Yes.
resist because you're trying to do
Yes.
too much. Um, what I've always found is if there's a whole bunch of things you see that need to change, pick something small and talk about it. Like we talked about offline, the kitchen table. It's the great equalizer. Everybody can sit at the kitchen table and just say, "Hey, here's some things that I'm thinking. What do you think?"
Right.
Or even do some reverse psychology is like, what kind of if you could make some changes, what would you like to
Yeah.
see change? And the cool thing is that you'll find when you have a really open, frank discussion and wanting everybody to be honest, they will usually touch, if not the nail on the head, very close to the things that you see that need to change. Most firefighters are we're like animals. We all can notice when something's not working right, and we need to make it. We need to fix it. A lot of times we don't have the tools to fix it, or we don't know where to start. And one of the things that firemen hate to do is ask for help. So they just let it lay and festers, and they get upset. They're mad, and even though they know that change needs to happen, next thing you know, your morale's kind of in the toilet, and it's just a huge
Right.
spiral. But to make change, any if people listen to this, I'd use caution. Start
Right.
small, and then build
100.
from there. And and if you get that buy-in, especially as a battalion chief, and you're assigned in a battalion, but you have a station that you that's
Sure.
where your home is, and you start there and grow out. When you get buy-in
Yeah.
from those guys, uh, then it'll start to spread. You'll have that positive word of
Absolutely.
mouth. But don't come in there and just make some just ridiculous, wild changes that nobody's even ever thought of, or look for a problem that doesn't
Right.
exist and then
Thank you.
or create a problem and then try
Sure.
to change that for the sake of trying to build yourself up as a leader because you'll fall on your face. Firemen definitely know when people are not genuine or when they're just not who they
Yeah.
say they are.
100%. I definitely agree with you on that.
So talking a little bit about humility, which is a huge it's a huge uh, asset that an officer needs to have. Touch on that and how you gained that through the military, what they taught you with that, and how you brought that into the
Okay.
fire service, and then how you can impose your humility to teach the younger people coming up that sense of humility, understanding that you're not the smartest person in the room just because you're wearing a
Absolutely.
white
I
shirt.
do agree with that. But before I touch on that, and don't let me lose my train of thought, okay?
Okay.
I want to say that one of the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest enemies of change is laziness and complacency. And if you are in a department and you don't do a lot of training, you have a lot of downtime and stuff like this, and so people are not engaged in the craft, then laziness and complacency is one of the easiest things that can happen to for us as bad habits as human beings. Is that if we can chill, we're going to chill. If we can sit back and relax and just come to work and watch television, or come to work and go to our bunk rooms and stuff like that and just relax, then we're going to do that. And so imagine that you have an atmosphere, an environment where that's the case, and then you have this young lieutenant that comes in, or this young um, uh, battalion chief that comes in, and or station chief for that matter, and they want to, okay, now we need to start, I want to incorporate some training here. Now you're going to get an uproar. Well, we've been chilling all this time and everything. So we have to make sure that we maintain an environment of professionalism, of excellence. And excellence doesn't mean sitting around and doing nothing and just coming to work and putting your feet up. That's not conducive to excellence. So we have to maintain an environment of excellence, and then that would help lead into being more accepting of changes when they come. And I hope I've added to that conversation and didn't take anything from it. So.
No, and we'll come back to humility, but I do want to touch on training, and you said a lot, and you said a lot of truth. As an officer, if you're a new officer, and I think I put this on Facebook or something, I don't know. One of the things I've always said is that what you allow under your leadership, under your command, what you allow to slip by, what you will embrace as okay, is going to define the type of leader you are. Meaning that if you allow your guys to not train, to sit around and watch TV all day, if you allow that under your watch, you are doing a huge disservice to your people. And a huge disservice to the public, not to sound a cliche, but are relying on you. They pay your salary, relying on you to be 100% when the bells go off and fix their problems. If you're not a well-trained unit and you're stumbling on the fire ground, that could lead to at the least, property damage, at the most, a line of duty death or a civilian death, because you were either intimidated by your crew and you did not want to say, hey guys, there's a need for training. We need to make sure that we're good now, but we need to make sure that we're always good. There's always room for improvement.
Right.
Or you're just lazy, and maybe your mentors or maybe the people that brought you up allowed that to happen, and you're viewing that as the norm. So yes, training is important, and training is something that definitely can build your
Right.
leadership credibility as a new lieutenant coming on the shift. If you say, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to pull hose lines, or we're going to go out and we're going to do whatever, as my buddy Frank Ritchie always says, as the officer, as the chief, if you're there, be the first one to start
Right.
that drill. Be the first person to put the shoulder load on your shoulder and pull that line, and show people that if you make mistakes, it's okay. You recover from those mistakes, because it humanizes you, and it brings you down that, hey, he's still a firefighter at heart, even though he's our boss. But he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. I think that speaks volumes of who you are. But if you're not the kind of person that wants to make waves and you just want to coast through your career, you're dangerous, and you're setting a terrible precedent.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about humility. I've had
Yes.
some guys that have been in the Navy, in the Marines, and they talk about, one of the key components is humility, and it's even on my
Right.
challenge coin. Humility is probably one of the four pillars of a good leader, and so
Right.
talk a little bit about that, and how maybe there was a hard way that you had to learn that humility, or you needed to teach that to somebody coming up, moving up in the ranks, somebody that maybe you're mentoring.
Yeah. Well, the way I learned, I would hazard to say that I've been a humble person from most of my life anyway. So it wasn't a very difficult thing to learn for me. But one way I did learn humility is watching. I was a non-commissioned officer, but you'd watch the like the chief master sergeants, which is the E9s. If you're in the military, you understand that's the highest non-commissioned officer, and then you'll see colonels and generals and how they conduct themselves when they're around other people and when they're in meetings and things like that, and you can see even though they're confident their humility shows by the way they engage with the people that they follow that follow them that follow their orders. They ask questions. They are genuine when they seek your advice. They don't beat their chests. They're not haughty. The most successful of those leaders were very pretty much down to earth that I've come across. And I had an assistant chief when I was a fire inspector. I had an assistant chief, Chief Parsons. He was that type of guy. He didn't raise his voice ever. He was very calm. He taught, he coached, he mentored. When he didn't know something, he would ask, and he wasn't afraid to let you know that he didn't know a certain thing, and he would guide you at the same time. So that's mostly how I learned how to apply humility within my leadership style. Is that I don't. I recognize that I don't know everything, and I recognized that from when I was a young NCO, that I don't know everything. I see my peers. I look at my peers and I say, man, that person knows this, 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 and this. I want to learn more about that. And so it comes from understanding who you are. It comes from understanding that you are not the end all be all. It comes from understanding you don't know everything. And anybody who believes that they know everything, that's a problem. If you think you're the smartest person in the fire station, that's a problem. Um, I, even though I believe that I'm quite intelligent with different things, I look at other assistant chiefs and I like, dang, he's really sharp at that. I want to know more about that because he's really good at that. I'm saying this to myself. So you have to be able to accept the fact that you don't know everything and that you're constantly trying to learn. If you're constantly learning things, then that should keep you humble. So.
The a couple of things that you said, you had made mention that it's okay. You don't know everything. I was actually writing it down, and I've said it 1,000 times. To new officers, it's okay not to know something, but you need to be
Yes,
smart enough to A, recognize you don't know,
right.
B, figure out where you go to get that information. And you know what? It might be that firefighter that's been in that
Yeah.
station for 10 years and you just got there. So
Yeah.
by you asking questions, getting
Hmm.
that information does a couple of things. It shows that you're human and that you don't know
Yes,
everything, but it also shows those firefighters that you're not afraid to ask questions to make yourself better. If you
exactly,
fake it,
exactly.
man, they will know, and they
Ex-
will exploit it too. No doubt about it. And you will never have that credibility with those people if you fake it or if you lie. Um,
you know,
so it's okay not to know something. Um,
and I'll tell you one other thing that I do deliberately, and you mentioned faking it, but let's say we're all in a room and we're having a class or we're having a briefing or something like that. And it may be something that I catch that I may know, but it's maybe something very simple, but I know that this could cause some confusion. Even though I understand it, I'll be like, hmm, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, I don't know what it means. You know what I mean?
mhm.
And what that does is like you said, it lets the other people, even the subordinates in your team, know that you're not afraid to ask what may be deemed a stupid question because you didn't understand it. So it encourages them, hopefully, that they will ask questions as well and let them understand, like you said, that, hey, the chief didn't know that. So, it's okay if I don't know this. I got to learn it too, just like the chief wants to learn. So,
I think,
I hope that makes
yeah, that
sense.
humanizes you. It makes you like you're going to be more approachable, which is
Yes.
also important as well. It's
Yes.
funny. I did 34 years in Montgomery County. I retired as a
Hmm.
battalion chief.
Hmm.
Literally retired for a total of 5 days, and then got hired in Frederick as an assistant chief. So basically, got a promotion, and
Oh,
so
wow.
I went to a whole nother county. And to
Yeah.
say that there's stuff that I don't know, man, that's an understatement. I'm an assistant chief, one of two assistant chiefs
Yeah.
county. There's a lot I
Right.
don't know, and I
Right.
asked the captains and the lieutenants that are at headquarters and the other
100.
chiefs, that
Yeah.
hey, I don't know this stuff. I don't know where do I go to get this. Tell me about
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that would be absolutely asinine for me to try to fake it like I know something. They're going to know right away. This dude's
Right.
an idiot.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's exact. That's a very important key to humility, is always trying to learn. And if you're trying to learn constantly, you're going to be constantly reminded that you don't know everything, and you're not the greatest person ever. And if you run across a person who believes that they're the greatest person ever, that's a problem. That person is a problem.
yeah,
So
and the unfortunate thing is we all know people that are like that,
yeah,
that think that they walk into the room and just because they have the cross bugles, 3, 4, 5 bugles on their collar pins, they're not
right,
the smartest person in the room, because there may
sure,
be a dude that retired from the military as a commissioned officer that knows more
mm,
about leadership, maybe led men in battle, uh,
sure,
and you're going to try and teach them something about leading people when you're read the room you'd be
yeah,
surprised what people have to offer. Even the recruits that are, when I run across the recruits in the hallway at headquarters, I'd always engage them in conversation. Hey, what's your name? Where are you from? You ever been in the fire service before? You have? What did you do for a living?
yeah,
Just to get to know them, let them know that you don't have to be afraid of people in white shirts. But I generally want
right,
to know what you did, what made you come into the fire service.
sure,
They
sure,
may have a background in electrical engineering. What am I going to tell that
yeah,
guy about electricity in a house that's on fire? That he doesn't
yes.
already know. But
So
yeah,
one of the key things for when you have someone that is that arrogant and don't show that humility, that putting that person in their place has to come from his leadership or her leadership. Someone from in their chain has to recognize that this person's attitude is not beneficial to the team, and that their leadership would have to come in. And this is what I would do if I noticed that a young officer is a little bit too arrogant. I'll have to pull him in and say, "You're a little too arrogant." um, and I'm just straight up like that. And I would tell them, you probably may get a better product or a better service from the people that you're leading if you tone down this posture that you have, and then hopefully give them some things to read, or give them that opening to ask me how they should go about doing certain things. But it has to come from somebody above them that has to put them in their place and tell them and show them that they recognize these things in their particular character or leadership style that is not going to be beneficial for team building and to reaching a certain goal. So,
and I think we've all known people like that. And you're right. You can't have that, recruit firefighter, 1 year firefighter telling the deputy chief that, hey man,
right.
you're kind of being an ass. Unless you guys grew up together and you're friends, that's totally
Right.
different. But I think a lot of it comes down to, and we go back to what we talked about in the very beginning of learning to be, a leader in your organization. What training did you have? And I think some of these people, when they start putting the different collar pins on and they start moving up the ranks, they feel that they have to know everything. And they see it as a sign of weakness that they don't know something, where it's just the opposite. It's a sign of strength if you say, I'm not quite sure about that. Do you know? And if neither one of us know, well, I'm going to go
Mhm.
find out, and then I'm going to tell you, and then we both are going to know. It's like I said earlier, it's okay not to know something, and just because you're the deputy chief of the organization and you've got 25 years on the job, there may have been things that you've either forgotten. I mean, all the policies that are out there, you can't possibly be memorizing all of them. Or maybe there's newer ways to do things. Maybe they're teaching at the training academy different ways to do things than the way that you were taught. So
Sure.
now it's different. It's not wrong. It's just different. But
Right.
I think that these senior officers that are kind of, I don't want to say cocky, but arrogant or a little hostile,
Yeah.
maybe because they feel that they need to know that, or they need to show everybody how smart they are, so they force
Right.
themselves that they're
Sure.
they force their attitude on people, and it's a huge turnoff. I mean, most
Yeah.
firefighters are pretty smart, intelligent people that
Yes.
on a dime can figure out what an issue is and fix it. That's our
Yeah.
job. um so I want to move into a little bit about, we talk about decision making, and I've touched on this on many shows, of making decisions, and how do you make somebody feel comfortable making a decision? I have talked to people and asked, why are new lieutenants or captains or just officers in general that are riding the apparatus reluctant to make a call, to make a decision, to set that incident in the right direction. One of the excuses I always hear is, the number one excuse is always, well, they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but where I come from, you very rarely have you ever heard of somebody getting in trouble for making a decision. I mean, unless somebody died or got seriously injured, or it was just a dumb decision, but more of, the decision you made wasn't the best, but we recovered from it. Um,
Sure.
to get into
Yes.
that a little bit, what are you going to do for a new person coming in to help them that decision making process?
That really being comfortable with making decisions is comes from training and comes from competence and confidence. So you train to become competent, and once you're competent, you become confident. When you're confident, you can make decisions. So you have to be able to give this person a type of training where they are continuously have to make decisions within the training environment, and then they become that experience in looking at different scenarios, getting that praise and feedback from when they make great decisions. It'll become easier for them to make great decisions and good decisions that will lead to the success of any particular operation. So it's very simple. Just they need to have the training, and they need to continue having the training, and they need to be put in situations where they need to make those decisions in a non-threatening environment. And once they get used to doing that, making decisions become easier. And that's how a lot of things happen with us in the military. Of course, is that the when you become a NCO, and you're a young NCO, you're given situations where you have to make decisions. And of course, you're going to make the wrong decision every now and then. And then somebody will say, well, maybe you should have did it like this. You don't get caught, come down on a hammer unless somebody, like you said, something grave happened. Then you may get in real big trouble. But let's face it, usually the decisions that lieutenants have to make won't, hopefully, well, there is a few that will kill somebody, but they're at a level where they can become to gain their confidence, so that as they move up, they become even more confident in the decisions that they make. So I hope I answered that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, another key thing to take away from that is it all comes back to training.
Yes.
One of the things that I did when I was a battalion chief is I would go to the stations and I'd sit the officers down and I said, "Hey, look, I need a drill to be produced about whatever
Yeah.
ventilation, uh, truck work. Engine companies doing truck work because not always
Yes.
the truck's not going to be there."
Right.
But I don't want the lieutenant or captain to give a drill. I need you to pick somebody, I'm a
Hmm.
firefighter, to lead this drill on whatever it is. Give them, 2 or 3 shifts to come
Sure.
up. It can be PowerPoint, they can do whiteboard. I don't care. But I
Yeah.
want them to come up with a drill, and
Right.
then I want them to deliver to the battalion, and we'll break it up in two different shifts. We'll get half the battalion one shift, and the next shift we'll get the other half of the battalion. But I want them to lead that drill. I don't want them to think that the captain and lieutenant always has to lead a drill. And
Yes.
what my goal was for these newer firefighters to a be comfortable speaking in front of people, because
Right.
that's part of our job. As you move
Yep.
up through the ranks, you need to learn how to speak in public.
That's correct.
How to do research, even if you're searching on the internet, how to
Hmm.
formulate your thoughts into writing so it makes sense, how to
Yes.
use PowerPoint, how to use some of
Yep.
these Microsoft programs. So there was a whole wheel full prong worth of things that I was trying to accomplish with the newer people. But the biggest thing was to boost their confidence so
Sure.
they can, research a topic and be competent about that particular topic, and then feel comfortable delivering that drill. And what I found that's probably the best thing that they've ever made in their entire career, and delivered it, because the last thing they want to do is look foolish in front of their peers.
Right.
So they're going to knock it out of the park. And
Sure.
I got to see that, where even if the material that they were producing was elementary, the biggest thing is that I got them up and learning how to do something, and
Yeah.
hopefully that builds as they
Yes.
move forward, and
Yeah.
and to make decisions, and
Right.
but it all comes down to training.
Yep.
And I said, hey, we're going to run, we're going to, a couple engine companies, we're going to run a mock house fire, we're going to lay out and all that stuff, but I want your fire 3 ride in the front seat as opposed
Right.
to the lieutenant of the cab. I want you guys to ride behind.
Yep.
Let them make decisions. Let's see if they've been paying attention, not only to
Yep.
the policies, but what you've been doing as the officer up front.
That's right.
And I also want to see is, have you been training your people to take your position one day? Because
You're
you're
right.
not always going to be there.
Yeah.
You need
That's
to train your
exactly right.
people to take that spot. And
That's exactly.
I found that boosts their confidence to make decisions. And I let them know it's like, it's okay to make a mistake. We're not, like you said, not going to lower the hammer down on you. We're going to use it as a teachable moment. Now, you do have, chiefs out there that the moment you make a mistake, they're going to come down on you because they are lacking something in their life or in their career that makes them feel good by coming down or pointing out your mistakes. And
Yes.
unfortunately, you have that in the fire service. The good thing is as a subordinate, you see that trait and recognize, I'm not going to be that way. I tell people,
Well,
you learn really good lessons from bad leaders as well as from good leaders.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But it's something else I wanted to talk about, because we're coming up on our time.
Yep.
Is one of the things that I heard in another one of your podcasts, one interviews, is the leading the new generation. There's there's a generation gap. There's a whole paradigm shift now and everything like that. And when you and I came up in the fire service, we were used to having an autocratic style all the time, for the most part. And, a lot of times, as we get older and we become the leaders, now this new generation, especially Gen Z, they have a different way of looking at life. So, and social media has connected them in a way that, for instance, if I tell somebody to do something, they want to know why. Now, when we were young, we didn't have to know why. We just know that the chief said to do this. Obviously, we trust the chief. So whatever the chief tells us to do, then that's going to be conducive to us getting to where we need to be. Well, the newer generations, it's not that they are disrespectful or anything like that. It's just that because of the technology and social media and they're connected, they just want to understand, how does this connect to this and this? And then they can push forward once they understand what the path is. So when we have to, especially as older fire officers, we have to understand that they're not being disrespectful. They're just more inquisitive and want to be able to connect this path that you're talking about, and that it's not disjointed. That this is the path that's going to lead to here. this is why the chief said this and this, and this is why we have to do this. So, and a good example would be, you have one truck that has to clean the kitchen, one truck that has to do the stalls, one truck that has to do the hallways and the bathrooms. And together, the station looks amazing. But if you have one person that doesn't, or one crew that doesn't do their particular part, then you can understand that there's something disjointed there. So you have to be able to connect the dots for the younger generation. This is why we do this. We do this so that we can have attention to detail, so that we can have discipline, so that we can learn processes get from A to B. This is why we do these particular things. And this is why I'm asking you to do this. And then once you build that rapport, that trust, then you can probably later ask them, do this, and they won't ask why. Or they understand that this connects in some way. So I just wanted to bring that up.
No, and that's, I've talked about that a lot. I try to tell people, I said, just because they ask why is not a sign of disrespect. It's because this generation coming up in the fire service now, the younger people, they have never not known what it's like to not have the answer at your fingertips.
100%.
Any question. Whereas when you and I started, we didn't even have computers in the fire department. We had to go find stuff, in the encyclopedia or in the dictionary or through policy and procedure manuals. We didn't have YouTube or anything like that. So they're used to that instant gratification, not in a negative way, but to know the entire process. When we arrive on the scene of a house fire, I need you to get a line to the front door and get yourself ready to go in. I'm going to do my circle check. And when I come back around, you're going to be ready to go in and you're going to be waiting for me. So that makes the whole operation move a lot quicker. That's why I need you to get that line to the front door and get yourself ready to go. Now they know what from A to Z. And,
Yes.
And from then on out, you'll never have to explain that to them again.
100%.
But we have said, I've said many times, on the fire ground, it's not the time to ask why. You need to preload those expectations long before that call ever comes in and explain what's going on. Hopefully they're getting that in recruit class. But them wanting to know why is not disrespectful. It's their whole thought process is, what's the purpose of doing this? What's the benefit? And how do I play a part in this?
Exactly. You said it perfectly. I couldn't have said better.
And it's just, I had to learn that, when people say, well, Chief, why do we got to do that? And you feel yourself getting angry. It's like, because I said so.
Right.
That used to work when I was a young guy. It's like, I need you to do this. Okay. Let's get into it. And you just did it. And eventually you'll figure it out, well, that's why we're doing it.
Right.
But, now they truly want to know the whole from the nuts to bolts. So it's not a bad thing.
No, it's not.
So yeah, it's something that I talk about all the time, because I don't want these newer officers coming up feeling that these young guys are questioning them or trying to undermine their authority.
That's right.
They really want to know.
Yeah, that's right.
But so like you said, we're coming down to that 1 hour mark, and again, I truly appreciate you taking the time, being on that mountain time to get on here and to really talk to me about your views on leadership and things that you've seen. So before we go, I want you to go ahead and plug your social media, because you do have a lot of good content and people really need to go and hear that. And you're not going on for hours and hours. You're going on for, a couple of minutes, a good 2-minute lesson that you're really talking about things that you've learned along the way that are truly good leadership tips. So go ahead and plug yourself where people can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Thoughts on Leadership. That's all one word on Instagram, Thoughts on Leadership. And like David just said, it's usually a 1 to 2 minute thought and tip on how to be a better leader. And I try to keep it between under 2 minutes, but every now and then it may go a little over because I know attention spans is very short these days. So, but Thoughts on Leadership on Instagram, and that's where you can find me. Follow, like, comment, share, all that. So,
excellent. Well, again, Chief, thanks for coming on, and I will definitely be looking at your Instagram every day, seeing the new stuff that you're putting up there. And again, thanks a lot for coming on and making this show successful.
I appreciate that. And it's every Friday I put a new one up on every Friday. Okay. And I appreciate it. And it's an honor. I appreciate you reaching out, and we'll keep in touch.
Absolutely. Take care.
You too, sir. Bye.
See you. Thanks for listening to this month's Side Alpha Leadership. You can reach us on the web at www.sidealphaleadership.com. We're on social media, on Instagram at Side Alpha Leadership, on Twitter at Leadership Side, and on Facebook for Side Alpha Leadership.